Hello and welcome to the next section of Unit 11. So this section is all about the quadratic formula. So I have added a link on the Google spreadsheet, and it's also on my website, but for the quadratic formula song sung by me. If you go to my website, I have it in a different accent as well. But anyway, the quadratic formula is this long equation that you see down here. So the reason I have the song is to help you remember it, because you're going to have to remember this formula. And as you can see, there's a lot of letters and stuff in there. So it's a lot of stuff to remember. So definitely you need to go listen to that song, and I'll probably play it in class. But before we get into the quadratic formula, whenever I say a zero of a function, that's the same as saying a root or an x-intercept. So zero of a function is the same as a root, which is also the same as an x-intercept. So these things are all the same thing. So if I say a zero, find the zeros of the function, or if I say find the roots of the function, or if I say find the x-intercepts of the function, those are all saying the same thing. So the quadratic formula is one thing that we can use to find the zero of a function, or the root, or the x-intercept. So which is why it has x equals, because we're finding the x value of the root. That is what we've been doing when we completed the square, or last unit when we were factoring. So that's what we've been doing this whole time. We've been finding the roots, finding the zeros, finding the x-intercepts, however you want to say it. So moving on to example 1. And the reason we would use the quadratic formula is because we cannot factor the function, the equation, and we cannot complete the square. So if you notice, on example 1, you cannot factor this. You can try as hard as you can, but you're never going to be able to factor it. This number is an odd number, so I do not want to complete the square. So my next option is to use the quadratic formula. And I know it looks kind of crazy, but once you remember it, it's not going to be that bad. First thing before you do this, though, is I want you to write A, B, and C up here. So the A value is 1. The B value is -7, and then C is -14. So doing this will just help you once you start entering everything into the formula. So the quadratic formula is x equals -b. Whenever you put in a number for a letter, whenever you're substituting like -7 in for b, put it in parentheses. So -7 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so -7 squared. So again, put in parentheses. -4 times a times c, -14. So again, notice I'm putting all of them, all the a, b, and c's in parentheses. And that's all divided by 2 times a. So now that I have everything entered in there, I'm just going to start simplifying. So we have a negative, so that turns into a +7, plus or minus the square root of a bunch of stuff. So -7 squared, -7 times -7 is +49, minus, so I'm just going to do this. So I got a 4 times 1, which is 4. And then 4 times -14 is -56. So I did 4 times 1. So what I did was this. I basically just multiplied these three things together, divided by 2. So I got 7 plus or minus the square root. So minus minus turns into a plus. So 49 plus 56, all divided by 2. 49 plus 56 is 105, I believe. So next thing I want to do, I want to see if I can simplify this radical. So I'm doing the factors of 105 in my head, and you cannot simplify this radical anymore. Next thing I want to look for is, can I do these numbers go into, or does 2 go into these numbers, excuse me? And the answer is no. So that means I can leave it like this. I am done. I cannot simplify this anymore, and that's my answer. So this is the answer, this is the root, these are the 2 roots of this equation. So this is why we cannot factor it, because we never could have come up with this number without doing the quadratic formula. In example 2, oh, and by the way, it also asks us to tell whether it has 2, 1, or 0 x-intercepts. So we got, it looks like there's one answer here, but since we have 7 plus or minus, that's going to give us 2. So there's going to be 2. Instead of x-intercept, I'm going to write roots. So 2 roots. So example 2. Oh, very important thing. When you're doing the quadratic formula, one of the sides has to always equal 0. So write that down, make note of that. So right now, I cannot do the quadratic formula at this moment because I do not have one side equal to 0. So that means I'm going to have to subtract 5 on both sides to get that right side equal to 0. So 2x squared minus 3x, negative 15 minus 5 is negative 20. Now we have one side equal to 0. So now I can go ahead and label my a. So a is 2. B is negative 3, and C is negative 20. So I know that x is going to equal negative b, so negative negative 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 3 squared, minus 4 times a times c. All divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 2. So I have everything entered where it's supposed to be. So don't forget parentheses around each letter, each variable that you substitute. Negative negative becomes a positive, so positive 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared is 9, minus, so 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times negative 20 is negative 160. All divided by 4. So 3 plus or minus, that turns into 9 plus 160, divided by 4. So 169. So I happen to know that the square root of 169 is 13. So 3 plus or minus 13 divided by 4. So that means I have 3 plus 13 divided by 4. And x equals 3 minus 13 divided by 4. So 3 plus 13 is 16. 3 minus 13 is negative 10. So 16 divided by 4 is 4. So 4 is one of our roots. And the other one, if I reduce this fraction, I would get negative 5 over 2 because 2 goes into both of these numbers. Or if you wanted to put negative 2.5, that's fine. So these are our 2 roots, our 2 zeros. So there are 2 zeros in this function. And our last example. So solve the equation. Oh, before we start, got to get one side equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. So then I'm left with 4x squared plus 8x. 7 minus 4 is 3, so it's plus 3. So now I have one side equal to 0, so I can write down all my variables. So a is equal to 4, b is equal to 8, and c is equal to 3. So now that I know all the a, b, and c, I can enter them into the quadratic formula. So x is equal to negative b, so negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so a squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, so 2 times 4. So everything's entered in, so now I can just simplify. So negative 8 plus or minus 8 squared is 64, minus 4 times 4 is 16, times 3 is 48, all divided by 8. So x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus the square root. 64 minus 48 is 16, divided by 8. The square root of 16, we can do that one, and that is 4. So now I'm left with negative 8 plus 4 divided by 8, and x equals negative 8 minus 4 over 8. Negative 8 plus 4 is negative 4. Negative 8 minus 4 is negative 12. And then, sorry if you're running out of room, you can just do it over here. So if I reduce that, that becomes 1/2. And if I reduce this fraction, it becomes negative 3 over 2. And those are our 2 roots, so this one also has 2 roots. So that's going to be it for the notes. The next page talks about discriminant. You don't really need to know that, but if you're curious, you can check out my website. It's filled out on there. But that's it.